Hi class, and welcome to week 5 of the Biblical Hermeneutics online class. For any of you who do not know me or have not been able to put a face with a name yet, I'm Courtney Veazey, and I've interacted with many of you already on the Old Testament side of things in our hermeneutics class, but I'm very happy if any of you have any questions on the New Testament or Old Testament side as you work in your passages and your projects coming up, to help you with anything that I can in those endeavors. I am very thankful to Dr. Price to be able to teach alongside him in this course and help you however I can as I work at New Orleans to finish my PhD in biblical interpretation. So in hermeneutics on just a wide scale there. And so happy to help you in any way that I can in that endeavor. And happy President's Day to everyone. Hope all of you are getting to enjoy this holiday in one way or another. I am wearing my patriotic shoes here, so celebrating that way, and also want to say happy Mardi Gras to everyone as I also have my fleur-de-lis on and ready to celebrate in the city with everyone here, but especially this week as we look forward to the season of Lent that we'll be walking into and progressing over the next month, a little over a month, to looking at the greatest day in all history when our Lord rose from the dead. So welcome to all of that and week 5 of this class, and I hope that you've been enjoying learning more about the interpretive process of what we call hermeneutics. Now, you may have discovered this so far, but if not, I'll bring it out here a little bit more. But as you know and have read, hermeneutics is the art of interpreting and learning basically what all do we need to look into, to study, to bring this text down to make actual accurate application for today, for our people today, for ourselves today as we interpret the text. But hermeneutics itself, we get that word first from the Greeks, who, if you remember, Hermes in the Greek gods was the messenger god for the underworld. And so Hermes would deliver those messages and interpret them. And so we get the beginning of that word hermeneutics, from Hermes, and then the Romans come along in history and they take everything from the Greeks and all the Greek gods and they rename them. And their messenger god, their interpreter, communicator, was Mercury. And so we combine those two words to get hermeneutics and the deliverers, the messengers of the text. So such an important class in your seminary process, in life in general. And a lot of things, most of it, all of it, that we should be teaching in the local church and helping people to know how to accurately and responsibly interpret the text of Scripture to make application today. So this week, as you go through your discussion board, your readings, you'll see there in your syllabus, we're talking about the components of a model, the historical, cultural context, and the literary context. And this is why I wanted to put this video on, because we're going to be moving towards next week when your background studies are due, which many of you have already emailed and asked me about resources you can look into for that, and how do you exactly do that, what does that mean. When we're interpreting the text, as you've been reading, it doesn't come on an empty stage. There are things going on from this historical document, and just because things are historical, especially the Bible, obviously, doesn't make it any less divine. It's all Scripture is inspired by God, it's God-breathed. But it is set in a cultural time, and we've got to know what's going on in those settings so that we don't pull the text out of its original context, away from what the hearers really would have been hearing and understanding, and then again, making accurate application for ourselves. So you'll be reading more about that, and I want to help you, give you an example, just some things to think about in your studies coming up, and as you progress this week in reading and learning more about these cultural situations that we find behind every single book, every single letter and genre in the Bible, both Old and New Testaments, in ways that we need to interpret based on the things that we know about first century letters, poetry, things like that, and in historical cultural situations. So when we think about background studies of a text, you're not looking so much right now at what we find in the literature, except for what I mean as far as like the Greek, Hebrew, the technicals. That's going to come more with your word studies. Except you do want to look for clues within the passage that you're doing or the book that you're covering in general, as to why might he have said that, or why might the writer have put that in there? What's going on in the background that would throw up a flag for me to want to research more, to bring light and throw light on that particular text. So for an example today, I'm just going to pull some things out of the letter of 2 Timothy that we have the Apostle Paul historically in the tradition says that Paul is writing this to his son in the faith, Timothy, even that, the word son in the faith, is that a common thing? And this will go more into the word studies, but we would find out in a Jewish culture, and even in the Greco-Roman culture, for a man to call someone else his son, if his father is still alive and in the picture, would be sort of a big diss on that man's father. And so that affirms even more that we believe Timothy's dad is no longer alive, or at least definitely not there in the picture. And so he's borrowing Paul as a type of father figure, a mentor, and Paul is taking him in as an honorary son in the faith, as well as we know Titus. And again, Titus, we believe, was also basically an orphan child when it came to father. So Paul specifically calls them son. And we know from this, from studying the history, that Timothy is in Ephesus, and from Acts, we know that Timothy has been left in Ephesus. Well, what would be important about Ephesus when we think about this being written in the mid to later in the 60s of the first century, somewhere in the mid 60s there, who's on the throne in Rome? Well, we know historically that Nero is in the throne. What does that mean for the kingdom, for the culture, specifically for Timothy being in Ephesus? Ephesus at that time was the cultural center of the provincial world. How do we know that? Because you have to look back and study about Caesar Augustus, the very first emperor of Rome that we meet in the Gospel of Luke, who was having the censorship going on there. And Augustus moved the provincial capital from Pergamum over to Ephesus. And so we have the major agrarium there. The center of culture of the provincial world is in Ephesus. Archaeologically, there's so many people coming in and out of Ephesus because of the port city there that we can't even tell who's there in one place or another, because there's so many different imprints of different types of cultures there. So it's very interesting. I won't give you the answer to this, but why would that be important when we think about Timothy both having a Jewish and a Greek background? You know, what does that mean of him being a great candidate for culture, a place where there's so much different culture going on? So consider that when you think about it. But with the letter of 2 Timothy, it's Paul's last letter that he wrote to an individual at all that we have. The last letter he wrote to a church would be in Philippians. From both of these letters, he's writing from a Roman prison in Rome, and what's going on in Rome at the time. Again, Nero's there, Nero's on the throne. What's happening in Jerusalem in the 60s that is causing a lot of unrest in the Jewish circles, and some rebellion that's going on there that would influence some of the things that Paul is saying to Timothy about his urgency of him not getting caught up in civilian affairs. Over and over, the language that Paul uses in the letter of 2 Timothy is encouraging him basically to take the long view. Don't be caught in the moment. When Paul tells him about flee from the youthful lusts and pursue righteousness, we always preach that as a sexual thing, or like lust of the flesh. Well, some it's part of that, but when the Greek there really means sort of almost like a terrorist. Don't be a terrorist, where a lot of a terrorist are young men who don't think past the moment. You know, he's saying don't get caught up in the moment and forget the long view, the long purpose of what we're trying to do here and accomplishing God's work, and avoid so-and-so, and don't get caught up in the silly arguments like Hymenaeus and Philetus have done, and those things that spread like gangrene. Take the long view, Timothy. Why is he having to say that? What's going on in Ephesus at the time that would stir that kind of language from Paul to Timothy, even though we know this is his last letter? So tell us more about the culture of Ephesus. Tell us about the Roman Empire at the time. Who's on the throne? Who's writing this letter? What time is he writing? Why is that significant? And even at the end of the letter, he's given him some street advice. And he's saying there in verse 14, the last chapter 4, Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm. The Lord will repay him. Well, why would a coppersmith in Ephesus cause Paul harm? Because everywhere Paul went, the sales of idols making went down, because he's spreading the gospel. So there's ironwork going on there. There's certain trades happening. And why should he avoid them? What's going on in those situations? So now that's a lot that I'm telling you, but that's just things that I've gathered about a background of the text that would bring more light to the situations that we find here and what we read. Now, some sources that I want to just point out to you that would be very good for this. This is a part of your project, your portion, that we want you to use sources. When it comes to other things, applications, stuff like that, you need to be in the text yourself, wrestling those things out for you, between you and the Lord, and what you have studied to bring that out. That's not something someone can actually tell you. You've got to really work towards discovering those things, especially in this class, as that's what that's a part of it's about. I'm going to try to post something online for you from a research tab from the library's website to give you also some help tools and what to look for. But here's just an example of one commentary. This is the New International Commentary series, and again, there's Old and New Testament in that. So the NIC commentaries that you'll find in the library, that's a good solid resource. The Baker Commentary series, I know this is going to be maybe backwards to you in the camera, but the Baker Commentary is a good commentary series to have. The Word Biblical Commentary, you're going to find a lot more technical details and sort of dense language there, but that's also a great commentary to look into, very critical. And then, of course, the New American Commentary is also a great series, and you should find all of those in our libraries, and hopefully any standard theological library that you have access to. Now, what we're looking for, why I mentioned those is, you heard me say it, those are critical commentaries. They're not devotional driven. That's what we want to start looking away from when we talk about more in-depth academic papers, more like the I'm trying to think, the Blackaby type thing, or evangelical commentary that have that like in the title, or even maybe some more of the communicator commentaries. We want to somewhat start moving away from the more devotional, if that makes sense, and going towards the more technical. Now, these are many of them evangelically driven, but and very sound in their doctrine, but they've been critically assessed, and they're going to give you a lot more about the backgrounds and the language and the technical things like that. Not so much application, but more about the actual background of the text, and then the text itself in commentary form. So I hope that that's helpful. Again, you can contact me and email me at any time, and hopefully I'll be able to get back to you soon. And we just enjoy continuing to see how you all are interacting online, but we will greatly look forward to your coming projects in the weeks ahead, and just hope this is helpful for you, and look forward to dialoguing with you in the future weeks. Thanks. Bye.